2021 to 2022, and then that will be the 2022 budget that has just been signed by Mr. President, will be the last full budget that the President Muhammadu Buhari's administration will be having. So it's a transition budget because that budget also carries a huge component for INEC, a lot of electoral activities, and then it's also transition because we're also hoping that by 2022, all the negative effect of COVID-19 and its many variants and its effect on our economy will also be at least dampened a little bit by our compliance to all the protocols and healthy management of the economy. It's also a transition budget because we are practically moving from the end of the ERGP, the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, to a new era of the National Development Plan. So it's transitionary for many reasons. So as we look forward to 2022, the budget behaved in a normal characteristic that is consistent to the National Development Plan. In other words, it sustained the general increase in total expenditure for the federal government, moving from 16 point something trillion plus the supplementary budget for 2020 to 2021 to 2022. You can see that increase. The point there is that the government spending maintains that upward rise because of the huge government expenditure that is required to help churn out results for health, for education, for agriculture. So as we move into 2022, we are hoping that government spending will all together work with state expenditure, private sector spending to help take our economy to a higher level of growth.
Now, let's take a look at the reservations that the president had on, over additions by National Assembly to the budget. What do you make of the changes?
Okay, great. The government is made up of three big players, judiciary, executive, and the legislature, which is the National Assembly. So when we say the government, we should be looking at the three of them. So, but the budget is prepared by MDAs. MDAs make their submission to the budget office. The budget office just collates, and then that everything is put together and sent to the National Assembly for scrutiny. So when the budget is submitted to the National Assembly, it's more or less like a proposal. So the National Assembly interacts with these heads of MDAs during their budget defense. So based on their past performance for 3 years, what the Public Account Committee report shows, what the data from Accountant General's office shows, they look at all these things and they make that decision on how to help these MDAs raise their expenditure capacity. So National Assembly don't increase the budget on their own. It's based on the interaction with the heads of MDAs. The National Assembly also has its own budget, and if you look at its own budget, the increment of 4 billion thereabout was specifically mapped out for the development of the National Assembly library. So every project is stated, and even INEC also had a higher provision, and national population as well. So certainly the point there is that increment we saw came by the National Assembly is as a result of the interaction with heads of MDAs. But altogether, it simply just helps to raise government expenditure. That does not mean that the executive, on the other hand, may have all the revenue to finance that budget, but it just spells out what is required to be able to achieve the level of growth that we anticipate for 2022. So in my opinion, the increment by the National Assembly is born out of that interaction with head of MDAs, and it's not strange given the electoral activities we expect for 2022 and the national population census as well.
Let's dwell more on the implementation of the capital budget for the year 2021, which has been extended into March 2022. How will this redefine the economic landscape of the country?
Okay, great. President Muhammadu Buhari's administration has been trying to keep the budget calendar from January 1st to December 31st. And that's why you and I can see that there was practically a rush to ensure that it was signed today. Because the way the economy works with finance, it follows a calendar year. Companies have already closed their business year. Many CSOs, MDAs, everybody is wrapping up their financial year. Contractors are already taking stock of how they performed in 2021 so that they will know how to continue in 2022. So the extension of 2022 capital component, 2021 capital component, I beg your pardon, to March is to allow contractors to be able to complete their project implementation. You know, when the budget is passed, for the capital component aspect, procurement goes on. They have to select, you have to mobilize contractors, they have to go to the field, and then they begin all these contract and implementation processes. So it is because of the capital component that extension came about. So the extension, in my opinion, is also nice, so that contractors will know that they have up to March deadline to wrap up all their activities. But that does not mean that 2022 budget will not take effect from January 2nd, if I may, or January 1st, practically speaking. It's just that it will run concurrently. The capital component for 3 months of 2021 budget will run concurrently with that of 2022 until that of 2021 ends in March. So it basically just buys time for projects to be able to complete, so to attain completion, so that we can reduce this issue of abandoned project and lack of completion of project implementation cycle.
Also in the budget, we saw that there's a deficit of about 6.25 trillion, which is approximately 3.39% of our GDP. With the way things are going, are there any likelihood of this having an implication in the full implementation of the budget?
Yes, as much as possible. The budget, as we discussed, has, as one of my bosses will say, has 2 wings: expenditure and revenue. And like a bird, you need this expenditure and revenue to fly. So the revenue aspect is what federal government revenue aspect is named federal government retained revenue. So for 2022, it is projected that that budget should be about, the expected revenue for the federal government should be about 10-point-something trillion. So when you subtract that 10-point-something trillion from the projected or approved 17.16 trillion that we have now, that's where you get that deficit from. So the overall deficit for the budget is that 6-point-something trillion. Now, sale of private enterprises or some other forms of bilateral and commercial or multilateral loans. So, but when you now look at it in terms of the ratio to GDP, our Fiscal Responsibility Act provides that it should be about 3% of total deficit. But somewhere in the same Fiscal Responsibility Act, as the budget, DG Budget Office we want us to know, says that where there is need for government to spend more than that limit in order to address development need, government should not hold itself down. It's like trying to hold down spending where spending is needed even the more. So the point here is that spending, that deficit we have, exceeds the 3% fiscal deficit threshold as provided by the Fiscal Responsibility Act. But it is not out of our fiscal management latitude to do in terms of this particular period that we have insecurity to address, COVID-19 that requires a lot of health expenditure. Education sector also requires a lot of expenditure to reduce the out-of-school children phenomenon and to help the education sector implement the education sector plans and all these things. So what is important at your DG is to ensure that we have a healthy management of our fiscal of our deficit, so that repayment and debt servicing will not chop off every effort we are recording on capital project implementation.
Now that you've talked about debt management and the rest, the president harped on infrastructure developments, and of course we've been seeing that in different spheres, talking about transportation and also in housing deficits and the rest. Also on NT's Good Morning Nigeria today, we saw the Minister of Transportation, Rotimi Amechi, speaking about some plans to ensure that we have improvements in infrastructure development, especially in terms of rail networks across the country to further contribute to the economy. Many want to say there's a need for proper taxation as well. What role would this really play in aggregating all these things together?
Yeah, great. So like you pointed out earlier, what that deficit of 6.7 trillion just shows that, hey, dear Nigerians, we have a lot of spending to do, but the revenue to do it is not forthcoming as we would love to. We are all the window that is like the low-hanging fruit now is borrowing, and we've all been shouting that the borrowing we need to apply the brakes when it comes to borrowing so that we can manage. So if you look at in terms of fiscal policy in economics, borrowing, taxation are major sources of income for the government, borrowing and taxes. Now, we've been exploring the borrowing window. Now, this whole idea of tax is coming from the angle of ensuring that we have a robust tax ratio, tax to GDP, tax revenue to total expenditure ratio. So the concept is, if you look at the structure of our revenue, the tax component still has a lot of potentials that we can explore. We are not talking about increasing the tax rate per se, that increasing tax rate for personal income tax or company income tax or value-added tax, but we are talking about getting many people to come into the tax net. Many companies, individuals that are supposed to be paying taxes are evading taxes. So the effort now is to ensure that those people who evade and avoid taxes are all captured into the tax net. And all our wonderful tax reform effort, as much as it is beautiful on legislation, we need to back it up with the ICT component, the digital economy component, so that as you spend, the tax is being picked electronically, just like they pick this 15 naira charge on bank transfers from our bank directly. You get SMS for it until our tax system becomes backed up with the ICT, the digital economy aspect. In other words, I expect to see fiscal Federal Ministry of Finance working with the Ministry of Communication and Digital Economy, the NCC, and even Information and Culture to ensure that our tax system, the collection and all that, is administered using an efficient ICT system. So the concept is that once our tax system is healthy, then we can now have additional funds to finance infrastructure, because our infrastructure development plan has a huge expectation on what government should be spending, but the dearth of infrastructure is wide. Agricultural infrastructure, housing, road, electricity, water, schools, everything, a lot, recreational parks, government buildings, all these things require huge spending, bridges, rail tracks and all this. So the point is that no matter how much government spends, government will always need additional funds. So tapping into what we can get in addition to what government is spending from taxes is what is really required, and it's very, very important. Another thing is to see how government can maybe begin to look at how to concession some roads or tracks into private hands, so that as they manage it, government gets revenue for it. But revenue is what we need to attain efficiency for 2022 expenditure.
And I think talking about concession, we're gradually seeing that, especially in the sports sector, where we're seeing a partnership between the Ministry of Youth and Sports and also some private companies in the country to take over the management and administration of national stadiums in the country, Lagos, Abuja, and the rest. But the budgets of 2022, that has just, the bill has just been signed into law by the president. There's a lot of dependence on the prices of oil. And of course, there's this optimism that it will deliver what is expected of it. But what are the likely fallbacks in case?
Okay, great. The crude oil price is one of the benchmarks used for the budget. You have crude oil price, crude oil production, you have exchange rate, you have inflation, and GDP. All other macroeconomic parameters were held constant. In other words, were approved as submitted to the National Assembly from the executive side. But crude oil was increased from 50 to about 62. Now, from 57, I beg your pardon, per barrel to 62. Now, the idea is to ensure that our economy is not vulnerable to external shocks, because crude oil, as President Muhammadu Buhari once said, we need, as much as we want to diversify away from crude oil, we need crude oil funds to diversify our economy. So if you look at the way crude oil prices have been performing in 2021, at about today, it was doing about over at least $70 per barrel. So the concept is to look for a benchmark that we can use to price our budget, so that when we get the revenue from it, and in case there's volatility in the global crude oil market, a downward a fall in the crude oil price will not affect our own revenue. So that is the concept. But there's the non-oil component is where we need to really pay attention to. And non-oil, we need to be specific to ensure that we fund and support export agricultural products that have export potential.
Oh, yeah.
Everything that we
Cash
can
crops.
do. Exactly. And the Nexim Bank has a lot of role to play in this area, because that bank has a mandate to ensure that all our non-oil exports are supported with the credit they need to attain full potential. So there's a lot of work they are doing, even at grassroots, but we're just saying that there's need to support them even the more. Now, in terms of raising the crude oil to 62, why the National Assembly did that is because since the crude oil price has stayed above 70, hopefully, all things being equal, it should stay like that at least. If it falls, it shouldn't be worse than 65% based on all crude oil projections and forecasts. So that's why they raised it. And the whole concept is not to get money for themselves, but rather to increase the money from crude oil that will be available for spending in order to fund the federal government budget. So the whole concept of our crude oil, of the revenue, of the crude oil price, I beg your pardon, is to increase revenue for the government spending. But we need to do a lot of things to encourage non-oil sector. Like you said earlier, ministries need a lot of collaboration. Central Bank is one big player recently, 2020, 2021, in intervening in sectors, agriculture, even health, pharmaceuticals. We need a lot of collaboration between Central Bank and those MDAs, so that these MDAs and Central Bank will work like in harmony to attain the specific goals. The feeler from MDAs is that Central Bank is intervening in every sector. Now, CBN needs to intervene so that they can tame the demand for foreign exchange from those sectors that is making their own target of keeping exchange rate stable. CBN cannot sleep on that. But what is expected as we move forward is collaboration with these MDAs so that every intervention that the CBN is doing to help these sectors, they can also capture it in their own plan and then work towards having a total implementation of this partnership kind of intervention for the economy.
As we gradually round off the discussion earlier, we spoke about the president being consistent with the January to December budget cycle. We've also spoken about the president, this one being the final full calendar year budget that is going to present or sign into law. Let's delve more into it as we round off discussion now. What are the differences that we've witnessed comparing the days of the years being crossover for the budget cycle, and now that we'll have the January to December budget cycle, and also the implication of the president now for the next one, which would many would want to say like to see it be sustained?
One area that President Muhammadu Buhari's administration really helped in our fiscal management space is in this timeliness in budget passage. There was a time it takes up to 7 months to get the budget passed. 6 months, 5 months, 4 months, 3 months, then until from 2019. Don't forget also the introduction of the Finance Act that also helps to strengthen and keep a healthy check on mopping in revenue. So that timely signage of the budget is very important for planning, private sector planning, state level planning, local government planning, and even for federal government planning. We work with CSOs, with multilateral and bilateral partners, with donor partners. All these people want a clear planning framework of our government spending so that they can know how to support states and federal government at different levels. So if you even look at this particular 2021 budget, it took even longer to be passed. If you look at the template or the standard the President Muhammadu Buhari administration has been able to set, it is the longest when you compare to 2021 to 2020. But what is important is that it was signed before 31st, on or before 31st, as provided by our 1999 Constitution as amended, section 80 to 84, as the lawyers want you to know. So it's still within framework. So the timely passage is important for planning. So as we go into 2022, like we said, the budget is for 2022, and 2 big events that we cannot be able to model very well will come into 2022, including National Population Census. The funds needed for it, right now, the National Population Commission may not be able to capture it appropriately. And even all this debate about subsidy withdrawal or no subsidy, what is needed for INEC support, and what is also needed to help women and girls, persons with disabilities. So I foresee that as we go into 2022, budget implementation, it is very possible that because of the inability to capture the actual cost that will be needed that time, these MDAs may come forward again with supplementary budget. So we are looking forward to a 2022 that has a lot of government expenditure, but we are still trying to contain within the National Development Plan. In 2023, President Muhammadu Buhari will still have another budget, but it will stop in May, and the next administration may want to also back it up with supplementary. So by and large, we are looking at a situation where government cannot relent its role in leading the economy in terms of driving outcomes for education, agriculture, health, women, and humanitarian affairs. And expenditure is needed to do this. What is critical is that government should continue its effort to sustain spending, because that's what government is meant to do, but sit up in terms of its revenue generation. And all MDAs should be taxed to using their efficiency unit to step up or gear up or jack up their ability to generate independent revenue, as they've been doing already. But there's need for more accountability to ensure that what they remit is actually and transmitted or deposited within the government purse. So generally, this is the outlook, and we hope that all this expenditure from government will be supported by state government as well, and so that, because you need total expenditure from state and federal to be able to achieve our overall economic growth as anchored or as expected in the National Development Plan. So the federal government is just one, and the best the federal government can do for the economy is about 49 to 51%. We have states subnational level that also have 49 to 48% to do to ensure that we attain the growth target that is spelled out in the National Development Plan 2021 to 2025.
And so it's official. President Muhammadu Buhari has signed the 2022 appropriation bill of 17.126 trillion naira into law. And we'll be reflecting on that in the studio here with Dr. Taifa Abraham, who's an economic analyst. We'd like to thank you for coming into the studio today.
Thank you very much, Ayodiji. My
and of
pleasure.
course, need we wish you a Happy New Year in advance.
Same.
All right, that's been our discussion, and of course, subsequent would come in different programs on the Nigerian Television Authority to reflect on the 2022 budget. Let's continue now with our live transmission and different scheduled transmission for the rest of today.